Right.
What?
Now we're recording. So for anybody or no one who may or may not ever listen or watch this, part of my objective for this is to record my dad's legacy of his life and his association with scams for all posterity. So the first story I want you to talk about today is something that I've remembered ever since I was a child. You tell me the story is we'll call it the AT&T fraud call scam that was perpetrated on you and probably millions of other Americans. And I'll leave it at that. You go
Yeah,
ahead.
it was AT&T, but it was also MCI was the name of another
Yeah,
cellular
MCI
phone.
WorldCom.
Yeah, they
And
also.
if you look it up, you can find some. The guy from Jurassic Park did commercials for
Oh
them,
yeah.
and you know who I'm talking about when you say the guy from Jurassic Park.
Uh,
Not Jeff Goldblum.
okay, right. Um, I was a sales manager, regional sales manager in California. We were living in California, and I had a Motorola transportable phone in my car. That was a car phone that plugged in. You could take it with you. It was quite a unique device. And I made hundreds and hundreds of calls every month and would get a 20 to 30 page billing report on the monthly statement, and it would list every phone call that I received and that I made and how much it cost. So, I wrote off as a job expense all the business calls, but I would have to go through and spend more than an hour each time to go through each of the phones and try to identify, was that a personal phone call that I was not going to get reimbursed for? And I'd go through that whole thing, and then there would be calls that I couldn't even recognize. There was phone numbers that I would even test. I would call them, and it was nothing to do with my job or my life.
But they were real numbers, just to
Oh
nonsense.
yeah, they were real numbers,
Okay.
and so I had these 30-page reports with all the notes, either an X or a cross or a question mark. And I'd go through the whole thing. And then I would have to add up how much of it was my job expense that I could write off on my expense account, and how much I would have to pay, and then how much weren't even my phone calls. So I would I called up AT&T to discuss my bill, and they'd spend another half hour going through each one of those calls that I couldn't identify to let the representative know that wasn't my call. And at the end of that, they would take all of those calls I identified and say, okay, we're crediting them all. And you're getting a credit of $21 or whatever. And I'd say, oh, okay, great. Then that was like the first time. Then the next month came. I went through the same thing, going through pages and pages, finding numbers that I didn't call. And I called back AT&T and said, yeah, I have all these calls that I didn't make. And they said, blah, 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 okay, we're going to issue you a credit. I said, wait a minute. Why am I having to go through all these calls and identify them to you? Why are you making fraudulent calls on my report? And they would give some kind of amorphous, uh, we don't research these, we'll just give you credit because you're a good customer. And that would go on month after month. And it was just a pure scam because I would say, 95 out of 100 people wouldn't know or be interested or have the time to go through this every month. And so they were just loading their bills with fake calls to make extra money. And the customers be damned.
So just to clarify, they never gave you an explanation as to why they were doing all the fraud calls. It was just they just kept doing it.
Yes, yes, that was it.
That's it. And
So
how long did that go on for?
I was stuck doing that for months. I don't remember how many months. I think eventually I changed the service because it was ridiculous.
Well, that was because of your car phone, right?
Right.
Specifically, and that was through your business, your job paid for that.
Yes. Yeah.
So the point I want to make from that is if they were doing that to you, fraud calls, scam calls, with no reason, no justification, no explanation, then we can only assume how many other Americans they were doing that and how many millions, if not billions of dollars was being scammed off of all those people.
Of course.
And
Of course.
I'm curious, has anybody ever done an investigation on this? Was this ever figured out? I guess that would have been in the 90s.
Yeah, well, it was kind of, this was the days of business scams that were being investigated. There was the what was it? The Enron. It was the time of Enron, and there were so many scams going on, and they actually went after a couple of them and convicted and jailed some white collar criminals, and those practices seem to reduce or go away.
So this is gonna. So I'm glad you brought that up. So I think at least I know that your specific AT&T fraud scam calls happened in the 90s because I was still a little kid, and I'm gonna go along and keep saying it. This is gonna be a recurring theme in our lives. Is the 90s was the peak of Western civilization,
Yes.
and 9/11 not wasn't just terrible for what it was for many reasons, but I think it also symbolized the start of the descent of everything. Like everything's just gotten worse and worse and worse since
Right.
then.
It started with Microsoft not allowing for the year 2000.
Right.
A billion computers and control valves in the world that couldn't record the date properly because
Well, it sounds like that was just stupid, like faulty code, or was it? No,
right,
no. That's the whole point of the show, or whatever what hell you want to call this. Is it's because it probably saved money
of
to not
course,
have the extra digits.
of course. Then it gave them the opportunity to reset everything.
Right. And to charge money to do that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
We'll have to do some follow-up explanations to see if there's any follow-up on that. But the point I want to make is that at least back then in the 90s, it seems at least they used to actually arrest people and put them in jail. And then they
Right.
stop, and then it would stop. Like imagine that. You wonder why everything's crap now because nobody gets held accountable to anything.
Right. No, it's because what was it I was watching this morning? It's because we're headed to the end of the world, but we're taking the scenic route.
Yes.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Right. It should all just blow up. We'd be better off. But no, we're going to take the countryside drive and watch as things crumble and die.
And again, and was that to quote George Carlin? I may be butchering it, but I think he said something like, "When you're born, you're given a ticket to the freak show, and if you're born in America, you're given a front row seat."
Right.
That's what
It's
he
true.
said.
It's
So,
true.
so now I just remembered my phone scam stories that we should talk about, since you were also at least aware of or involved with them. How over the years, I pretty much had cell phone service provided by all the major companies, and almost all of them, if not all of the ones I dealt with, involved some sort of scam involved.
Oh yeah.
So let's start with T-Mobile. That was the first one. So this is when I was back in Southern California, and
No,
yeah,
no,
Dad, I know the story. Let me explain.
weren't you up in
Let me explain. It's part of the story.
Okay, go.
That's the whole point. Because I distinctly remember going to a T-Mobile store in Irvine, California, and got a phone plan. And then maybe shortly after that, or maybe even a few months, eventually, I moved up to Eureka, California. And this was back in the time when they actually used to charge you per text and per, like, they would nickel and dime you and all that stuff. So I was in Eureka, California, and because I was in Eureka, T-Mobile didn't have service available there. So they'd have to, it's like roaming. They use other cell phone companies, I guess,
Right.
Signal. And at the time, T-Mobile had a plan or program called my 5 Faves plan, where if you called your 5 favorite people, they wouldn't charge you for the calls.
Right.
So, I mean, I didn't have that many people to call. I call you, I call a couple friends. Long story short, I think I only exclusively used the 5 Faves plan. So,
Right.
because of that, I guess they weren't making any money off of me. So eventually, I got a letter in the mail saying that they were canceling my service. And not only were they canceling my service, they were charging me a contract early termination fee.
Yeah.
So I guess you can imagine where this is going. So clearly, that is unacceptable to the Heller family. And I want to also point out, again, before everything, this is back when the FCC still worked, at least in these specific situations. I had no complaints with the FCC until the last time I tried to use them. It had worked every time until then. So did we? Yeah, we used the FCC for that. So we filed a complaint on the FCC's website that I got charged a contract early termination fee, even though they canceled the service. I was fired.
Didn't we record the complaint conversation?
Well, you're ruining it by saying that.
Oh, okay.
But whatever, you already said it, so who cares? Point is, we got an FCC complaint registered, and then like a few days later, we got a call from like the executive office of the president or something.
Right. Yeah.
And then they tried to resolve the situation, and they said, your call is being recorded for your quality assurance. And then we said, no, your call is being recorded for our quality assurance. And like that. So then we tried to tell them that, yeah, you fired me as a customer, and then you're charging me a contract early termination fee. How the hell does that make sense? Well, and we're like, they tried to lower it to like, okay,
Yeah.
how about we only charge you like $50? Or how about nothing?
Right.
Because you guys fired me as a customer. It's not my fault that your system didn't make you guys money. It's not my fault that
Right.
I guess I fell within the cracks of it all. And the best part is that you got them to also pay for the phone, because you said, and you're making me buy this phone that I can't use anymore. So what about
Right.
that? And
Right.
it was nothing. They gave you $9, but that's
Okay.
something as
Yeah.
opposed to nothing. And that's another point I want to bring up, is that people, again, Americans don't realize this. And maybe it's not the same everywhere, but in every other country I've lived in, when you buy a cell phone, you can switch out SIM cards to any company you want and it'll work. The phone is not tied to the phone company. Completely different. So you can buy a phone and use it with any company you want with the SIM card. As Americans know, your phone is electronically locked to the company that you buy it from, so you can't use it with other companies. Now, again, this was back in like this T-Mobile experience. That was like 2006. So I think there was a law passed. I know there was a law passed that allowed you to change port your phone number to another company. But as far as the cell phones themselves, I don't know if there's a law, but you used to be able to unlock it. But of course, you had to call the company to
Right.
do that. So
Right.
you can imagine the bullshit story with that,
Yeah.
like the IRS not opening their phone, and they make it very difficult.
Right.
But we did it. So
Yeah.
I just want people to know when I say proverbially everything is a scam. Like,
Right.
yes, there's grand scams out there, billions of dollars missing, embezzlement, all this stuff. But what gets to me as an American, like, yes, that stuff's there, and there's really nothing you can do about that. But to me, it's all the little things, scams, that get to me. Just the
I
little,
I agree 110%. You know, the amount of joy that could be brought to Americans over those little things
yeah,
is like, okay, hey, how about you stop all these fake texts coming on my phone? Every American in the country gets those, including our somehow our congressmen probably also get it, and our our Pentagon people. Everyone's getting these. Hey, how about stopping that? Now, is that going to change the economics? No. Is it going to make Americans a little bit less miserable and a little bit more happy to not have to deal with that crap? Yes.
yes.
But nobody's going to do that
Well,
because there's
that's like the end of the bottom of the list of things to do. But
right,
the way I see it when it comes to miserableness, it's like the death by a thousand cuts. It's just all
right.
these little micro things that are just unnecessarily bullshit in your life. Like, again, why are cell phones electronically locked? And it seems just in the United States, at least from my experience. I've lived in multiple other
It's
countries.
it's because American capitalism is greed based, and that's all there is to it. There's no grand conspiracy. It's just the way the system is built, and everything come revolves and comes out of that fact, that basic fact.
Everything, and this is what I try to tell people overseas, like everything in America is is the act of and avoiding the action of people trying to scam you out of your money in some
Right,
way. Even right now, I haven't called Cricket yet. Cricket, they specifically said that my cell phone was not an auto renewal when I went to a Cricket office or store, whatever you
yeah,
want to call it. And
yeah,
then that was a lie because now
right.
they charged us another $30 for a phone I can't use because I'm in Europe. So I got to deal with that. How easy that going to be? Probably not that easy. And by the way, that reminds me, I want you to tell. I know what you like. Remember the ISP law that you were so upset about that no one seemed to care about.
Oh, nobody cared except Tom Hartman, who did his program for several days and went through the whole list. And what it was the first law that the Republican Congress passed when Trump got in, and the House and the Senate was Republican. They had they passed the first law they passed was this ISP law, which basically gave the ISPs, the internet providers, the right to use all your information that went through their internet, and that was it was voted on, and
And I want to clarify, you forgot to mention it's not just use your information; it's to sell your information to
right,
third parties without having to ask permission.
yes. And then there was the list that I still have in my papers. This is from 2017, like January 2017. and it's a list of every Republican congressperson and every Republican senator and how much they were given by the lobbyists from the ISPs in cash contributions. And every one of those, page after page, I mean, you know, what, 200 and 300 congressmen and 50 senators, each one of them had a different amount. And the amounts were based upon where they were they going, were they facing a new election or were they just elected? And you went through that list, and it was mind-boggling because it was so well defined. And I remember, you know, top dog was Mitch McConnell. He got $350,000 for voting. Yes, we want you to be able to sell our people's information to third parties because you're paying us to vote that way. And when I saw that list, I said the first thing that came to mind was, oh, the poor Democrats didn't get anything. So yeah, on this vote, I'm sure that the votes that the Democrats pass, they get their share of campaign contributions that become their money.
And the thing is, based on what you said, there's probably like at this whatever the lobbyist firm or firms that are specifically for like cell phone service providers probably had a division of math nerds who did all the calculations.
Oh, absolutely.
This congressman, based on this location, based on the value of their worth and their track record, will cost this much bribe for them to vote for this. So it's all algorithms and formulas.
Because the management, the CEOs, whose bonuses are going to be better, they basically decide, all right, we're going to give $15 million to the Republican Congress people. Well, who gets what? Oh, they all get the same amount? No, we're going to have our math nerds figure out how much each one is so that those congressmen will know they better get reelected if they want to keep getting money, and how much money they can get if they get reelected. So this was the beginning of the full exposure of Citizens United, where the cell phone the ISPs, internet service providers, and their lobbyists were given the right because of their free speech, because they're all people.
Because money equals free speech, and corporations are legally people. Therefore, when a corporation gives money to politicians, that's their act of speech.
And I always said, how can a company be a person? Does it get diabetes? Does it get pregnant?
Does it die? Does it get the death penalty?
Isn't that what people do? Real people?
Right.
That's our Supreme Court. Don't get me started on that.
Well, no. Please, this is about everything's a scam. So tell me what you think.
Well, the Supreme Court has historically and still is more than ever a tool of the corporatocracy. It always passes judgment for the corporations, not for the individual people. So, you know, this is just the way things are manipulated and work. You know, talking about scams, I just heard Chris Hayes just did his own, one of his personal opinions, and he was showing graphs and explaining how the lifespan of Americans has gone down for the first time in history.
Yeah, and you wish that you thought that would get more press.
Yeah, it didn't, but he gave a full out exposure, showed the graphs for all the other Western or the developed countries, and how they were all going up and then up. COVID came and you could see them; they all went down. But in America, our our life expectancy dove down, where the others, dropped. In America, it dove down because, yeah, we did lose 1 million people, and of course, those are the ones that died outright. But then there's millions more that are going to be dying because of it. And then it showed all the other countries rebounding, and that the life cycle is starting to go back up, except in America. And he's going through the whole thing. I'm saying he's trying to explain it. And I got so angry at MSNBC and Comcast because that Chris Hayes knows the real reason. The real reason is our $30 trillion health corporatocracy complex at work.
Or as I call it, our bullshit scam fraud health insurance industry.
Yes, that costs trillions of dollars, and nobody wants to ever, other than Bernie Sanders, nobody wants to make that clear to Americans that it doesn't have to be a scam.
Well, I've done this. I was going to say, I've done this. I use this with my students when I talk about high-speed rail, and why there probably won't be in my lifetime, or at least if I'm very old, but probably not, why there won't be a high-speed rail system. So right. I always ask them, which industries would be against a high-speed rail system? So let's just do it real quick. Car manufacturers, tire manufacturers, the oil industry, the airline industry, the airline manufacturers industry. What else?
The car makers.
Car makers, right? Car manufacturers. So all of those interests would be completely against any sort of high-speed rail, and I'm sure their lobbyists are always throwing some money around to stop that from happening.
There was an article on the Luxembourg News that I get every day, a highlight, and it was about the new grand plan in Europe to add train lines all over Europe to further connect country to country, city to city. And then they showed the U.S. system, which was pathetic. It was just pathetic.
Well, you know what? If you told somebody that in America or United States, say, that's because they're goddamn socialists over there.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, you mean that are making it easier for their citizens to navigate around the continent? Because think of it. I mean, if you comparatively, like geographically, I guess, again, relatively, the United States, mainland, and Europe are roughly the same size, you could say.
Right.
Europeans, and that's the whole point. They're not even the same country.
I know, they're different languages.
Yeah.
Come on. But I can't take a train to Texas.
Right.
I can't even take a train to Buffalo.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, yes, there should be a nexus point, and you should be able to take a train from New York City to Chicago to Denver to LA or San Francisco, but that should be the main line, and there should be a bunch of offshoots from there. But aside from the companies that don't want to do that, think about how much of a scam it would be to actually make that. What would the actual cost be, and then after the embezzlement cost would be. You know what I mean? Think of it would cost at least double or triple the actual cost in just bribing everybody or whoever wants their cut.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what I said about the lifespan. Your
Yeah.
your generation is not going to live as long as my generation.
Oh, Dad, don't worry. My generation's gonna get not get a lot of things your generation got. Don't
Right.
worry. I'm aware of that. We're aware of it. It's okay.
Yeah. They said
Ah,
if the Republicans torpedo the national debt ceiling, that will probably delay Social Security payments.
oh, that's how it begins. Remember, that's my theory about the future. That's my theory of government. And if I want to go insane, I might write a doctoral thesis on it. But my theory of American corporatocracy government is deliberate incompetence, because
Right.
that's when people get pissed off because, oh, the Democrats are weak and the Republicans are doing this and this is bad and no one. But that's been you're still thinking that people want to do it. You're still thinking people want things to work. So it's why they don't have to cut Social Security or Medicare in the future. They just won't let it work. They'll fire everybody, have it be one phone in an office that no one answers.
Right.
And what are you going to do about it? Oh, speaking of that, tell me about which company was that? That was in the 80s. You said there was a company you worked for that literally had a helpline that they would not answer.
Oh,
Tell us about that.
that was when I worked for Arrow Electronics, the world's largest electronics and computer products distributor. And they had their main warehouse was in Memphis, which was next to the FedEx central hub. And that's where everything would go that was returned from the customers from all over the country, and then the beginning of all over the world as they started to go global. And there was the quote RMA, Return Merchandise Authorization Department, that processed all the returns. And my customers would call me to complain that nobody is answering the phone there. They're calling to check on the status of, the $2,000 disk drive that they shipped back with an authorization number. And I would call from the outside line and realize that they weren't. And then I found out that it was that way on purpose, and the president, the CEO of the company, full well knew it. And at some meeting somewhere, I don't remember who or where it was, the statement was made, well, why would we want to invest in paying our customers instead of our customers paying us? Because return authorization means they have to give a credit. So basically, they have to pay their customer for the crap they sold them. And that was just built into the business model. And look, I worked for Canon, the world's leader in cameras, and then copiers. They had a contract with HP for the technology, and it was the same thing. The return center, when your camera malfunctioned, it would take weeks to get somebody to answer the phone. So this is the way American business, is set up.
So, was there any resolution to that, or
No,
they just
no,
never they just had no helpline and you're fucked, basically?
no. You would eventually get a call back. Eventually,
Oh, you mean with Arrow or
yeah.
Canon? Oh, so
Well,
you'd have to leave a message.
no, you couldn't leave a message
So how'd they get back in touch with you?
because you had to keep fucking calling them until finally somebody would pick up the phone,
Oh,
just like the IRS. Well, the IRS, they just didn't ever pick it up. So we had to go to an office.
yes, that is true. To get a student visa to come to Spain, I had to get a tax verification form. Bullshit, pedantic bureaucracy stuff. It basically says that I was paying taxes in the United States and not in Spain, and you had to get the IRS to issue a document to do that. and I tried to send it in the mail. They sent an email saying rejected it. You did it wrong. I did. Thanks for the belching. That's quality production value here. Great. Anyways, so I did it twice because I didn't know it. They said this was invalid, and then I didn't know what was wrong. So obviously, there's no name you can call. There's no accountability. So I tried calling the IRS, and they literally would not answer the phone
Right. So
ever.
now I want to talk about what I just learned when you sent me that, what was it, Chris Hedges interview or something? No,
Yes.
Wolf. It was Wolf, wasn't it? He was interviewing somebody who explained very clearly how the national debt crisis that is, in the news every day, all day long, and the disaster that will happen if the U.S. defaults on its debt payments. Um, and it was explained quite clearly by the Marxists how that works, in that the corporations, the large corporations, don't pay taxes. And because they don't pay taxes, the government has to borrow money by issuing bonds to Americans and to countries and people all around the world, because it's the safest investment one can make that earns interest. So everybody wants U.S. savings bonds, and that's what the debt is. There's $30 trillion in bonds that are out there that pay interest. It might only be 1%, 3%, whatever, but it's trillions of dollars. And those that is the ceiling that the U.S. has in its laws, that there is always a ceiling, and then you have to vote and raise the ceiling. And what that does is allows the government to issue more bonds to sell, which is basically borrowing money because you have to pay the bond back with interest. And who is buying the bonds? Well, I could buy a $10,000 single bond, but who's really buying them are those very rich corporations. Like, what was it? Exxon posted a $40 billion profit for the quarter or for the month. 40 billion. So they have the money and they buy bonds. So they're buying because the government has to borrow, because the corporations don't pay taxes. The corporations then buy bonds and earn money on the interest from the government. So
All
wait,
right.
so wait a minute. I know that's a little complicated, but wait a minute. That means they purposely have to not pay taxes, because that not only gets them off from paying taxes, but also drives new profits to the corporation on paper.
Now, so basically, what you were saying is the corporations actually make money from having to buy bonds.
Yes, so that is the grandest scam on the grandest scale that has ever existed in the world on this planet.
Oh, what is the U.S. government selling bonds to cover their debt?
Yes. And the corporations loving it and making money from it.
Well, and my understanding I've heard is that the debt ceiling as a concept could be fixed. Like they could get rid of it, that it doesn't exist anymore. So there's like an unlimited amount of money that the government could borrow, which sounds bad, but it's also better than this, where it's like constantly, again, deliberate incompetence. That's what I tell you. It constantly comes up as this political. It's like, again, it's all political theater, right?
Right.
This debt ceiling crisis doesn't have to exist.
Right. But but even beneath that is the worst fact that the corporations should just be paying their taxes and there would be no debt.
Well, I mean, let's not
Yeah,
have
yeah,
that. Let's not
yeah,
have that
yeah,
conversation.
yeah, yeah. That's it.
Oh, you mean like during the 50s, everybody says we're so great when Eisenhower was president and the marginal tax rate was like at 90%?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
like the Dutchman said at the whatever that Geneva Convention or wherever
That was Davos, I think, World
Davos,
Economic
yeah.
Forum.
And
Yeah.
he just said, just just shut up and pay your taxes and everything will be all right. Don't tell us about what you're going to donate.
Yeah, I'm sure he's not going to be invited again.
Oh no.
And that was also when that Michael Dell guy said, "Name me a country that had like a high tax rate." And he said,
Right.
and it's like, no, you dick. It's literally America. Like now it's like 70 years ago almost. Jesus. Didn't you know him? Didn't you meet him at one point in the computer industry or
Yeah,
something?
when he was in his dormitory room in Texas,
Yeah.
coming up with the concept of easily configurable personal computers.
So you knew him when he was still an up and coming dickhead
Yeah,
before he became a billionaire
right,
dickhead. Okay.
right, because billionaires don't have to be smart.
Right. Well, that's kind of more and more of what I'm coming to terms with as a man now, a 35-year-old who's soon to be 36 years old, going to be fucking 40 in a few years. Jesus Christ, how that happened? But you come to realize a lot of these people, like, yes, there are some smart people in the world, obviously, and there are some smart billionaires out there. But, based on my experience personally, people I've met who are fucking rich, and just from who we know who exists in the world, a lot of them are fucking dumb, and sometimes they just got lucky with something,
Yeah,
and then they managed to parlay that into more wealth somehow. So a lot of luck life ends up being luck, I think, and that's a lot of people can't come to terms with. That's kind of where the rugged individualism
yeah,
aspect comes into play because I always tell people, I always use your father, my grandfather, as a perfect example of the American dream, at least used to be. Your father was a milkman for like 50 years, right?
and a
He,
teamster, a union.
I was gonna say he drove a milk truck. He said he started off with horses. That's
Yeah,
how old. That's crazy to think. He was
yeah.
delivering mail by horse carriage, but he
The horses on the Teamsters logo.
right. That's where it
Are,
started.
that's where it started.
So the point is, he was a milkman, blue collar. He didn't go to college, right? He's a blue collar guy, Teamster's job. Worked there for 50 years, and that was a single, that was back when you had single income families, and him working as a blue collar milkman was enough to give you and your sister, my aunt, a pretty decent middle class life. Would you say so?
I wouldn't say middle class. I'd say working class.
So you still consider that working class?
Yes.
But I mean, you guys had a decent life.
Oh yeah, and we both went to college, graduated college. So this was the the strength of working class that moved you into the middle class.
So you wouldn't consider moving to Levittown being a middle class move back then?
No, no, Levittown was a working class.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. Well, I
Yep.
guess the point I'm trying to make from that is it sounds like even being working class wasn't complete shit back then.
Well, right.
You could still have a decent life.
Absolutely.
And
You had,
yeah.
you had everything of the American dream. You had your own house. You had great education. The public schools were wonderful. You had religious freedom to do what you want. You had to enjoy being white because that was still a major dividing factor in the U.S.
Well, since you brought that up, and so we don't get canceled, I want you to specify what that means. Talk about the Long Island bridge scam.
Right, Robert Moses was in charge of the public architecture on Long Island and New York City. There was also the Coliseum and Columbus Circle. So Robert Moses was heading up the Port Authority for many years. And when New York State decided to put in a series of connecting parkways, which were in the very beginning a single lane highway with parkland areas on the sides, and were designed for just cars, no commercial traffic. So it was a delightful parkway drive, and on those parkways they had these incredibly beautiful service stop stations, like built like stone houses from the 1700s, where you could stop and use a bathroom and get gas. So the roadways that had to go over the parkway, because the parkway just cut a straight line, the length of Long Island, north and south and east and west, you had all of these overpasses for the local roadways to be able to get across. And those roadways were like bridges that were designed with a oval arch opening that was designed to allow for the U.S. tanks to roll down the highways for, future emergencies and wartime, but were low enough to prevent buses. So buses couldn't use the parkways, which meant people from the city couldn't come out to Jones Beach and Robert Moses beaches because there was no way to get there. The buses would only ride on local roads, and there were no local roads. You had to be on the parkway to get to the beaches. And it turned out it was just a clever way of preventing colored people from coming to the beaches on Long Island.
Now, I have to ask, is that actually true? Like, is that provable? How would I know that?
It's as true as the sale contracts for Levitt House in Levittown said no colored people are allowed.
And not even that, you weren't allowed to sell it to a black family.
That's right.
And that was real. That happened.
That was real. Yeah.
I know that's, yeah.
Back in the 50s and 60s, there was, colored only bathrooms and water fountains still. And there was Ku Klux Klan and there was lynchings, and that was part of America.
Oh.
Yeah. That's how far we've come, but shows you how the depths of the problem and how recent the problem's been.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're still alive, and your dad delivered milk with horses. So it's all really not that far back, if you think of it like that.
His route at one point was he was delivering milk to the basement apartments in Harlem. Could you imagine him going down the steps to an apartment in Harlem, knocking on the door to collect the 75 cents due for the week's milk? But he had no problem. He had no problem.
He pulled it off?
Yeah, because back then they knew their place.
Oh.
Yeah. That's right.
That's a terrible thing to say.
But it's true.
Oh,
why shouldn't I say it?
Well, what do you mean by that? Like they had to pay or there'd be trouble?
Yeah.
Basically?
That's right.
Aye.
they would probably lose the delivery. So now they have no milk for their
Oh,
kids.
so it's just like, oh, pay or we just stop delivering and you get no milk and you're screwed goodbye.
Right. I guess. I mean, I don't know the outcome that way, but I can imagine.
Well, and did your dad had to drive? Was that you still living in Levittown when he did that?
No, that was when he lived in Astoria, Queens.
Didn't you say he had to drive from Staten Island, or he had to drive from Levittown to Staten Island
Well, yeah,
at one point?
that's years later. So he used to work delivering milk on Staten Island. So he would have to drive from Levittown out on Long Island down all the way across the Belt Parkway into Brooklyn and take the ferry from Brooklyn to Staten Island and somehow would get to drive, you could drive your car on the ferry. And then he would drive to the dairy and get in his truck and load up the truck and make his deliveries, and then had to do that all in reverse in the afternoon. So from 1 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon, that was his job when I was a young kid in Levittown.
So, hearkening back to that awful comment you just made about people knowing their place, I want to talk about my experience with that same phrase. So, there's another article that I read from The Atlantic years ago, and I use it. I frequented the time it was, and it's just so on point. It's called "Birth of the New American Aristocracy," and it talked about how, I mean, there's a lot to, but basically the whole point was how upward mobility is nearly impossible for the majority of Americans, and that it showed that upward mobility in the United States is the second most difficult country. And I always posit to people, challenge them to say, which is number one? Do you remember?
No, I don't. I would guess it's Russia.
No, United Kingdom.
Oh, okay.
Because they still have their class
Oh,
system
the
based
class, right?
right,
Class.
right. That no matter how successful you are, that no matter what university you went to or what you've accomplished, you still might just be an Irishman.
Right. Who was your parents? Who was your family?
Right, right. So
Define.
even Roberta told me once she was at a party, and Roberta was your deceased sister who lived a exceptional life, is a good way to say it, and she was well off for most of her life, and she was hobnobbing with some of the, would you say, I mean, in the limited moments I interacted her in her international travels, I met some crazy, weird, like super rich people who really run the world. But the point I'm saying for that is she told me when she was at just some like, super rich people's party, and she was talking to somebody. I guess it was when she was living in London, and she's having a conversation. And I guess she's talking to some Irish guy. And then like some Englishman comes over, and they were just talking, and it's like, oh, so where did you go to school? And the guy's like, you went to Oxford University. And the guy's like, oh, good for you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's nice. That's cute.
Right.
Good for you. Nice try, basically.
Right.
So the whole point of that article is that upward mobility, as far as like, no matter how much money you make, you still might just be, I'm using quotes, trash from whatever the north or whatever. And the reason I bring that up because when I was having a job in Hong Kong, and I swear this is what they said, I was working with two British people. One girl was from Wales, and the other guy was English, and they were literally just talking. They said they thought it was so strange. I'm paraphrasing it, but they're like, "You Americans are so strange. You think like working hard can get you ahead in life? In the UK, we know our place." She literally said that to me. We know our place. So part of that is horrifyingly, terribly depressing, but also part of it's kind of like, hey man, let's go have fun because I'm screwed no matter what I do. So I might as well enjoy it instead of trying to spin on this hamster wheel that's going nowhere.
Yeah.
So
I understand. Yeah.
So considering the grand scams we're talking about, like the billions of dollars that's scammed every day on everything, part of you can get pissed. Well, that comes back to my deliberate incompetence thing. It all comes back together. That's my overall, we'll call it Hellerism in the future. But my grand theory for contemporary American governance is what I call deliberate incompetence, where things don't work
On purpose.
on purpose. Right.
Right.
Like, could there be more people at the IRS? Didn't they just hire a bunch of people? Maybe. Will they answer the phone? Maybe. Like, Social Security, do they have to cut it or cancel it in the future when whether it's whoever, Trump comes back or DeSantis or whoever, they don't even have to do it. They just have to not do it. Like,
Right.
the Social Security payments don't go out. Just don't do it. What are you going to do? Call someone? No, nobody
Right.
answers the phone. It's what we've also called for years 1-800 go fuck yourself.
Right.
So that's the future. They don't even have to actually implement any change. They just make it not work.
Right.
And that's the famous story about Florida that I have to always put disclaimer. I remember seeing this on the news. Maybe it's a delusion of my own imagination, but I remember this is when Ron DeSantis first became president. Oh God. Now my Freudian slipping that. When he first became governor of Florida, and he had an interview with the news company, and he was saying during the previous guy, Voldemort, another Medicare fraud scam guy, another scam.
Who wants to
fraud.
He wants to run for president too.
Is he going to? No, I hate talking this horse race stuff, but if I was smart, if I was them, I meant to say that's going to curse me, whatever. If I was Trump, I would make him my vice president, Voldemort. Because
Yeah.
that undercuts DeSantis by the guy from Florida. However, Trump is from Florida now, and I forgot what the rule is, but you can't have the president and the vice president be from the same state or something. Remember that?
Really?
Yeah, remember that's why Dick Cheney had to be from Wyoming, even though he's living in Texas at the time. I think that's a thing. Remember that? Do you remember?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah. So whatever. The point is, I would make whatever. He'll just say he lives in Connecticut or something. Trump just
Right.
make it. He'll buy a house somewhere, but you should make Voldemort his vice president. Anyways,
All right.
wait. Let me finish.
What?
This is the most important thing about Florida. Dad, we could do a whole 5 hours on the bane of existence that's Florida from our life experience.
Right.
But let me finish. So it was when DeSantis first became president. Oh my God, brain is melting. He's going to become president. Oh my God, no.
No.
Well, here's why this should never happen. And in our family, and I hate to say it, it's actually worse than Trump if he becomes president, because DeSantis would be more competent in destroying everything.
Yes.
So what I've been trying to say, even though my brain's melting, is that when DeSantis first became governor of Florida, he talked about the previous guy, Voldemort, how the Florida unemployment system was designed to be so difficult and to have so many technical issues that people wouldn't be able to qualify for benefits.
I personally experienced that. I had between jobs when I was in Florida, I had to apply for unemployment insurance benefits. And it was all online. You had to have a computer. And it took somewhere between 20 and 30 hours to go through multiple tests, aptitude tests, and almost impossible for me to do. And I remember saying, and I'm a well-educated businessman. What about the hundreds of thousands of gardeners and roof workers that don't have an education, don't have a computer? How do they possibly think that they can get? Well, they would have to pay an agent.
Oh,
Yeah, like
who's probably friends with the governor, the company, the agency,
Right. What,
Oh.
right. What was her name? The Secretary of Education with
Oh, DeVos.
with 13 yachts.
Yeah. Ugh. So the point of bringing that up is that we, as people who've lived in Florida for a substantial amount of time, because everybody likes to say, "Oh, Florida's so cool, man! Like they were cool during the pandemic, and everybody could just do whatever they want." And it's like, yeah, or you were dead
Right.
and nothing works.
You know, when they don't even record the number of deaths they gave up after it hit 1 million, but it must be 1.25 million or whatever. Those are just the people that died. That doesn't even address the families of the people that died.
Well, right, wasn't there at one point? Didn't Florida have more COVID than the rest of the country combined? At
Yes,
one point,
yeah,
it was like
yes,
that. So
yeah.
the point I'm saying is that we experienced it firsthand how in Florida things didn't work, nothing worked. I always say, imagine going to the. I tell people, just think, imagine going to the DMV in Miami. It's literally like being in hell. I think
EJ,
I've already been to hell, and it's
don't
the
you
Miami
remember
DMV.
the corner of Ives Dairy Road and 25th Avenue, which was from our house in Miami to get to the Winn-Dixie across the other side of Biscayne Boulevard. You'd get the traffic lockup.
Yeah,
It you could people would just pull into the intersections, and nobody could move their cars for hours, and everyone would be honking, and the crazy Latins would get the bats out and start beating each other, and, and it was just the case where there was no zoning control. There was no responsible zoning control to see that even your basic traffic flow would be taken care of.
well, that just reminded me of remember the time that there was a car crash in the backyard of the house.
Yeah, yeah.
So
That
I
was,
ca-
that was Aventura police chased the guy from the mall, and he drove through
but
the.
it wasn't Aventura cops because we were on the other side of the railroad tracks, which means Aventura police didn't have jurisdiction. So they
Right,
were arguing over who had jurisdiction because we
right.
lived in unincorporated Dade County, which meant nobody wanted to deal with it. So I think it ended up being Florida State Highway Patrol officers.
Meanwhile, he drove up the driveway through the carport to the backyard, crashed into the fence, jumped out of his car, jumped in the river, and swam to the other side, and they never caught him.
But I just remember coming home from school and there were a bunch of cop cars.
Right,
And I'm like, what's going on? That ended up being a net positive for us because he uplifted the trunk of a tree that we had cut down.
right,
So he actually did us a favor, which was
right,
nice because if we didn't get the tree cut down, the tree would inevitably fall and collapse the house during
right.
a storm or a hurricane. So everything is connected. Oh,
There was where my room was in the house. Originally, there were two giant Norfolk pine trees, giant, which was very common, which were basically the potted Christmas trees that people would plant in their yard, and they were foreign to Florida, and they would grow quick and immense, and they would not withstand the hurricanes, because they weren't meant for the tropics. They weren't like the palm trees that would withstand the hurricanes. So anyway, they would eventually fall. So there was by the 95 entrance, there was a house there was a tornado in the neighborhood, and it pushed over the Norfolk pine on this guy's house and landed on him sleeping in bed and killed him. So those two trees were leaning over literally leaning over my bedroom. So I said, "That's it. They got to go." And we had them cut before I died. That would have been the end of Lee Heller Sr. Yeah, that would have been it.
Oh, hey, but remember, you're not a senior,
Right.
and I'm not a junior. So going back to my deliberate incompetence plan, our life in Florida experience was that nothing worked, and it was on purpose. And I feel a DeSantis presidency would inevitably cause them to Floridize the entire country,
Of course.
where nothing will work on purpose, and there's nothing
And
you could do about it.
and the 70 million people that voted for Trump will vote for DeSantis.
Ugh. Good. It doesn't work. I want it to not work.
Right.
That's how.
But they're saying that Trump is tired looking. He doesn't, he's lost his mojo, and
Well, he has.
okay, well, and that he's already hinted at if he doesn't get the nomination in the primary, he's going to run for as a third party.
Good.
So that means the Republicans will lose 30 to 40% of their votes.
And because everything is cynical as hell, if he does that, the Democratic Party would give him like $80 billion or something to run as a third party, because that's how fucked and cynical are. Remember, well, they did that during the midterms. You know about that? They were propping up the whole crazy, the insanoids.
Hey, it worked. It worked.
Yeah, but that's a big gamble. Like, well, that's what they did with Trump.
It's stupid.
No, but that's the whole point. Instead of having actual good policies that people want, we'll just prop up the insane freaks that make us look better by comparison. So even though we suck, at least we're not throwing poop in your face. That's where we're at politically. So, ugh.
All right, listen, I have, besides the original list of scams, which we haven't even gotten to.
I forgot about that list of scams.
I have more of the current scams to talk about.
Whatever you want, man. This is for you.
Well, you wanted me to talk about Orange County. That when we lived in Orange County,
yes,
it was completely Republican, 100% Republican, and the Republicans, as in Baby Bush wanting to privatize Social Security, they basically decided that they would invest the money for Orange County in junk bonds that paid like 20 to 25% interest. So they took all the money from Orange County and invested it. And then at that time, you had the financial collapse. And the county itself had to go into bankruptcy because they had no money to pay their bills. And that's a fact. You can go look that up. So Orange County went bankrupt. The voters realized that they were hurting themselves by electing these crazy Republicans who all they cared about was moving papers to make money for themselves. And that led to the eventual flipping of the county from Republicans to Democratic control. Now you have Katie Porter, who's been has her legs cut off at her knees because Pelosi has endorsed Adam Schiff.
Well, yeah, I mean, they made him do it pretty quick after she announced, so that's already the plan. They're just going to give him a shit zillion dollars.
Right.
And I guess that means Feinstein's definitely out now.
Right. Well, yeah.
She should have been out like 12 years ago.
Dementia, 90-year-old dementia.
It's an open secret that she has blatant, terrible...
And they run for 6 years, so she would be like 95.
Oh! Isn't that Chuck Grassley too? He's gonna be like 93
Yeah,
years old.
yeah,
Oh, I'm
yeah.
like, I know it's fun being corrupt as fuck politician, but aren't you just tired at this point? Don't you just want to
No,
relax?
because the job is too easy at that
It's
point.
too easy to not do it.
Right.
You might as
All that campaign money goes right in their pockets for doing nothing.
And you know what? That reminds me of the video that again you can find of when they were pushing Strom Thurmond and Robert Byrd in the wheelchairs
Right.
to make them push the voting button.
You're
Like
right.
they were just like meats, to quote Men in Black cockroach alien played by Vincent D'Onofrio. They were nothing but meat sacks by then. Like literally, like I always say, Strom Thurmond was in the Senate for so long. He was able to uh, vote against the Civil Rights Act as a Southern Dixiecrat Democrat and vote for the Iraq War as a Republican. I use him as the barometer when they did the flip. They realigned because
Right.
people are still using the Republicans were the party of Lincoln and the Democrats were the party of slavery. It's like, yeah, okay. And Teddy Roosevelt was a progressive and he's a Republican. So what the fuck are we talking about?
Right.
But Strom Thurmond is a great representation of the flip.
So now that I'm talking about Orange County, the scams, I'm going to talk about the famous Briarwood PTA meeting. When when you went to, I guess it was kindergarten, first
Yep,
grade,
first grade. I was 5 years old. Irvine, California.
right? I went to. I guess your mom was with me. I'm not sure. Anyway, went to the a PTA meeting at Briarwood School. It was outside in the back, where they had the outside
Yeah,
picnic tables, and there was hundreds and hundreds of parents there, and they were talking about how the Briarwood School needed a new copy machine because the one they had was too old to service, and they talked about how to get the money to pay for a new copy machine. So they started to talk about they were going to organize having the little kids like you walking the streets, knocking on doors, asking for donations. And I'm like sitting there, fresh from New York, by the way, completely horrified at that thought, not knowing how safe Irvine was. Just what we're going to have the little kids marching around knocking on doors. There's probably a.
well, I just want you. Are you sure? You told me did they want us to sell stuff, or is it just donations? Because I remember you telling me they want us to sell like
Well,
bullshit.
they were discussing how it was basically
Yeah,
to go door to door to raise the money, and I said I raised my hand. I said, "Excuse me, could we all just pay a 25-cent tax?" And the whole meeting, the hundreds of people, everything went silent like crickets. Like when the Dreyfus Fund speaks, everyone listens. And it was this immediate realization that I had mentioned the one word that you should never mention, ever. And I did it publicly at the school, on the school grounds, at the PTA meeting.
and
And
you
I
just
and
and you
I
just
said, why don't we just pay a 25-cent
you said
tax?
the T word.
The T
You
word
you you immediately fucked yourself in Irvine,
immediately.
California. And you had just moved from New York back then, so you're some black-haired guy with a suit from New York talking like this. Hey, why don't we just pay a 25-cent tax instead of
Right,
having our kids go around and yeah.
right. So then I realized how embarrassing that was, and I noted that after the meeting, all the moms got in their assault vehicle SUVs, their Humvees, to drive 3 blocks down the road from the school to their home in their assault vehicles that probably cost $700 a month in car payments. But hell, they're not going to give up a 25-cent tax for the school copy machine. I said, oh, this is hopeless.
Perfect representation of Orange County. And
Yeah,
that was the early 90s. That's when you could still buy an SUV guilt free without
right,
giving with nobody gave a shit about global warming. By the way, I even like we even conceded the war in that we used to call global warming,
right,
but even calling it climate change is already a euphemistic loser
right,
rhetorical statement. Climate change, that could mean anything. Could be going up, could be going down, could be doing
right.
anything. But global
And
warming
right, and who knows how what causes
could be
climate
anything.
climate
Right.
change?
Change is good. I thought you guys liked change, right?
Didn't just 10,000 years ago, which is only twice the time of the Egyptian pharaohs, that the world was covered in ice sheets, hundreds of feet thick in the ice age. That wasn't long ago, so that was a change that had nothing to do with uh, burning oil. So anyway, that was the Brywood tax scam and the Orange County bankruptcy scam. So now I've covered everything that's current. So we would have to go to the list, the scam list.
Well, this is a perfect opportunity because I only have a minute, less than a minute and a half left on this Zoom.
Okay,
So we can decide if we want to continue the scam or we'll stop right here. But either way, we'll take a pause.
okay. So what's going to happen now?
I'm going to figure out. There we go. I'm going to figure out what's happening next. Hold for either we'll be back right now or see you next time. All right, we're back. So now, since you were on a roll about Orange County, you're saying the T word in Orange County in the early '90s and immediately screwing yourself to your new community. Why don't you
Right.
continue telling your tales, telling your tall tales of or a New York City transplant to sunny Southern California in the early '90s?
Well, it's not so much a scam as a interesting, funny comparison between two cultures in America. It's not like different countries or uh, different cultures. It's the American culture, but how the local culture was so different to experience um, between Long Island, New York, and Orange County, LA, California. So how did we end up, the Hellers? You, your mom, and me moved from Long Beach, Long Island,
Long Island.
Long Island to Irvine, California. So I worked for Arrow Electronics, and Arrow had created a major business division called Computer Systems Group to sell not just transistors and diodes, which was Arrow's beginnings, electronics parts, um, but to also do the new tech industry of computer products that were being used in all homes and businesses. It was kind of a gold rush time. So I was in charge at headquarters in Melville, New York, of the marketing group in CSG, responsible for storage devices, basically disk drives. And we had 5 regional offices that were had salespeople and tech support people and warehouses to sell, these hard disk drives, 5.25-inch disk drives, and also 8-inch disk drives, hard drives. So um, I was able to turn the inventory better than most other products, and also at a profit. So I was very successful as a director of marketing and assets for the group for my product set, which were the storage devices. Now, the storage devices number one regions were in California. Northern California, there was a regional office, and Southern California, the regional manager in Southern California in Tustin, which is next to Irvine, left the company, and I had let the president and vice president know that I was interested in marketing and sales. And they basically called me in on a Friday and said, okay, you want it, you got it. You have to be there Monday. So go home and tell your wife that you're going to be living in Southern California starting Monday. And it was one of those, be careful what you wish for. It just might come true.
Right.
And oh God.
And I have to interrupt because I just remembered I actually have distinct memory. That's when we were literally living at a hotel, right?
Right.
Yeah.
We immediately had to go, and the company paid for our what did you call that place?
Embassy Suites.
Right, Embassy
Remember?
Suite. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We were living there for a couple of weeks while I had to find a place to rent, and Arrow paid for all of the expenses to move. It was funny because I had I had while we were at the Embassy Suites, I we had the moving company literally went into our home in Long Beach, and that was my first house that I owned, thanks to my dad leaving his money when he passed. Anyway, he was they actually had the moving company go into the house and pack up everything while all of us were already at the Embassy Suites. So they packed everything, including the waste baskets with the trash still in them. They wrapped them up and
They
put
just
in the box.
they literally just wrapped everything.
Everything.
Even
Uh,
the trash. They ship trash across the country.
Absolutely. And they put it on the trucks. And then I had found a nice house to rent in Irvine across from the orange groves in
Mm-hmm.
Tustin. We took a couple of walks with the dog there. How did the dog get there?
You must have brought I knew. Well, that's when you brought Harry. We didn't get Henry until he moved to Southern California because he's from Yorba Linda. Remember?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they delivered everything. We had the house in Irvine, and um, the company paid for all of it for the move. Now, while we were in the Irvine house on 29 Rosano, uh, there had been a minus 30-degree night in Long Beach where our house was up for sale. And the Long Beach house on 11 Barnes Street had the pipes, the water pipes and the heating pipes ran up the walls and across the house in the attic, and then down to where they were going. So the pipes were all up in the attic and then would distribute throughout the house. And that attic had those two little vents on both ends of the gable, and those vents were to the outside. So that went to minus 30 degrees, which is similar that we just had here last night. And the pipes froze in that attic, and the pipes burst and poured water on the whole house. So Arrow Electronics paid for me to sell the house at a loss. It cost 165,000 to buy, and I had to sell it for 120.
So they paid the difference?
Yeah, yeah,
Wow, I can't even imagine any corporation doing that for anyone
right.
today.
So those were the high times, and a lot of stuff to talk about. But um, what I found was going from uh, dark suit and tie at headquarters on Long Island in New York to Southern California, Tustin, where the, the work habits were quite different. So it was a shock to me. So some of the differences were when I got there, I asked my secretary, I had my own personal secretary, I forget her name, but I said, so what are the office hours? So she goes, well, George gets in at 7:30, Doug gets in at 10, Mike gets in at 8:30, and I said, no, 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 no. What are the official office hours of our office? She says, well, I guess that would be when I'm here. I said, okay, let's start with that. What are your hours? No, 8:30 to 5. Okay, those are our office hours. So I posted that on the doorway so that people would know that's the office hours. And, this was when there was the concept of like swing shifts. So if somebody came to work at 10 o'clock because instead of it being a 2-hour drive from their home during rush hour,
Yes.
they could only do a 1 hour, and that was kind of acceptable. That you kind of had swing hours depending upon your personal needs. So that was kind of what you know. We have the Long Island Expressway, the world's largest parking lot. You just had to deal with it. So we established that, and what I found interesting was uh, learning the local Southern California mindset. So you mentioned a couple of things. The first thing I want to mention is the housing project that our house was in had an alleyway drive where everybody's garages were. So our garage was completely full with all the boxes that came from New York. It was like that cartoon I just sent you, EJ.
Yeah.
Did you see that cartoon?
Hmm.
That's what our garage looked like because the moving company came and they just jammed it all in the garage, so there's no place to park. So I used to go out to try to go through some of the boxes with your mom, and I noticed that the other neighbors were in their garages, and a couple of them were vacuuming the carpet in their garage. And their garage was pristine. They had these white cabinet works, and everything was stored away nicely. And they were literally vacuuming the floor in the garage. And it was so shocking to me because I couldn't understand that. I said, well, doesn't the car leak oil? So it took me about a year to come to grips with some of these cultural differences. And one of them was about the car. The car in Southern California was way up on the top of the list of life's priorities and important factors. So you were defined not by where your not not by where your child was going to college, what university they were going to, but what kind of car you drove. As far as the top three things, you know, back in New York, the top three things is your children's education, where are they going to university or college, your job, and I forget the third thing. Well, in Southern California, the first thing on that list is what car do you drive? That's how you were identified. The second thing was what do you do? So in New York, the answer would be, oh, I'm a milkman, I'm an accountant, I'm a politician. In Southern California, what do you do would be answered, well, I do windsurfing, I do some hiking up in the mountains. And no, 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 no. What do you do? Oh, you mean like that's what I do. So you would define that on how you spent your private time, not on what your work was. And then I forget what the third thing was. I can't remember these stories.
Well, that's where I'm going to cut in right here because I remember you telling me two things I want to make sure. Remember, but since you're talking about this right now, you said that I think you said like it was either every Saturday or Sunday you'd go out and everybody would have their garage door open and they'd all be like washing their car
Yeah,
at the same
yeah.
time to like I don't know if that was like showing off the car or bonding like
It
a
was it was
ritual about the car.
it was bonding, and it took a year for me to finally understand that it wasn't a garage. It was the car's bedroom
Right.
because the car is one of the family,
Mm.
and they were putting it in its bedroom. And when I finally had that that eureka moment, then it started to make sense. Wow, it really is about the car. It's like it's a member of the family. You know, there's the pet dog Fido, and there's the BMW. They're all equals, including your kids, who you go out rollerblading with on the weekends. So that was one of the differences. One of the other differences was um, waiting online at the bank. So you know the bank with the felt whatever you call those banisters, waiting for the next available teller. Now this is back when there were lots of tellers, and in Irvine, when you went to the bank and you got online, the person next to be served next didn't pay attention and depended on the second person in line to tap them on the shoulder to point to the available teller. Now, when you're online in New York, you're just scanning. The next in line, I'm scanning. As soon as I see a pen go down, I'm on my way to that teller. I don't need to be told they're available. But in Irvine, you kind of just hung out in that first position and waited for the person behind you to tap you and let you know that a teller, and they would point to number 3, is waiting for you. Oh, thank you, thank you. And then you talk to the teller, and the first thing that they would say, oh, Mr. Heller, how are you doing today? Well, I found that so annoying that I got into trouble once because I was kind of in a rush and I had been waiting to get to the teller, and I got, I don't know, just a withdrawal, a deposit, whatever it was, threw it down on the counter, and she goes, "Oh, Mr. Heller, how are you doing today?" And I slammed my hands on the counter and just barked out, "I'm fine. And how are you today? Can you just do your job and give me my money?" Well, it was like time for the cops to be called.
Because at least, I mean, even in New York, that's probably frowned upon. But to
Right?
do that in Irvine, Orange County, they probably thought you were an insane person.
Right. A madman
Yeah,
who's going to rob the bank or something.
right.
So, no, that was that thing with being next online, which I found so curious. Another thing I found was so on the freeways, I mean, the freeways were unbelievable. They were huge. They were everywhere. And everybody was speeding all the time. And when I say speeding, people would be back to back, nose to tail, doing 80 miles an hour. And like at first, it was freaky because how do you exit and how do you enter when everyone's going so fast and so close together? Well, it took a while to get used to that. Those traffic patterns. It took about a year. What I realized eventually was in California, there's no rain. Southern California, there's no rain. There's no potholes. There's no wet leaves. There's no ice. There's no snow. There's no wet roads. So in New York, you always had to leave a space between you and the car in front of you so you could watch the roadway to see what you were going to be driving on. And if there was potholes, you could avoid them or you could slow down. If there was wet or ice or snow, you adjusted. But so in California, none of that. So the roads were always perfectly smooth. And there you had everybody doing 80 miles an hour, nose to tail, with virtually no safe speed in between. And what you would find from time to time was on the shoulder, you would see cars upside down, literally sitting upside down with their wheels up because they had to flip. They had to jam on their brakes, and there's no room to maneuver. So I got a speeding ticket once because everybody was speeding, and for some reason it got me. And it was one of these comedy club traffic schools. And I'm there with like 1,000 other people, and he's explaining, the rules of the road. And I said, well, I'm new to Southern California here. I said, what do you do when everyone's going 80 miles an hour and there's no space between you and the car in front of you? Because I would try to slow down to be safer, but as soon as I'd slow down, it opened up a gap and somebody would pull in. So I was always moving back, trying to allow for a gap. I said, what's the solution to that? He says, you have to go with the flow of traffic. I said, and therefore here I am with my ticket.
Right.
So that took a while to get used to how to drive on the freeways in California. What else? What was this? Domino's?
Before you do that, and maybe we'll do that another time, but we'll see. But I wanted to go back to your job at Arrow because you forgot the whole part of how even though they sent you to be the New York City guy to get their California office in shape, then people complained, and then you got reprimanded by your bosses.
Oh yeah. So I would have weekly meetings with the whole crew. Like I said, I had salespeople, inside sales, outside sales, tech support, warehouse, office staff. And I would have, a weekly review meeting with everybody. So in sort of in that first year, I was trying to explain mainly to the sales force how always lowering the price to get an order leads to the other people you're competing with lowering the prices. And all it does is it brings the pricing down so that nobody can make any money. And when you don't make any money and you don't have any profits, and I went over to the front of the office where all the light switches were, there's the bank of light switches for the overhead lighting. I said, if we don't have any profits, this is what happens. And I shut all the lights off for effect. I have to pay the electric bill, have to pay
Right.
for the lights. And I was trying to get that concept through to them, and they all got freaked out, and they reported me to the president, and I got reprimanded for that. What I'm fucking, what kind of a moron am I? Shutting off the lights. And I didn't even try to explain it.
You're just like, all right, because I
Yeah,
guess, I mean, again, that was probably the equivalent. You might as well have like taken a crap on the desk in the room, like
right.
to them. That's how, you know what I mean? It's just a different world.
Look, I went on sales calls with my salespeople. We would go to, what was it? I went to the sales call to Yamaha, which was the Yamaha division for musical instruments. So they made electric keyboards. So right about that time in the technology revolution, keyboards became computers, and you could program them, and they all had disk drives, floppy disk drives in the keyboards. So we were trying to sell them to the Yamaha in California, and we're in this gigantic walnut glistening conference room table in this big conference room. Me, the salesperson, one of their engineers, and the president. And the president comes out, and he's in shorts and flip-flops. And he puts his feet up on the conference table where we're sitting to have this meeting.
Yeah.
He puts his stinky flip-flop feet up on the table and says, "So what do you have for me today?" And he was blonde, looked like a surfer. And I just said, "Hey, is this what business is going to be like?" That was crazy. Those were some of the differences. One of the other differences was there was a number of differences. Anyway, that's enough of the differences. Oh no, the car wash. Oh, the car wash. What an experience. In New York, when you went to the car wash, you drive your car uh, onto the track. Sometimes you would ride in the car. Sometimes you would wait, in a lawn chair, and they would put your car through. And then a crew of at least a dozen guys would hand wipe to drive the car off when you were done. And it took about 5 minutes. Well, let me tell you, when you went to your car wash in California, you definitely went to the lawn chair. There was a table. They had vending machines. And you would sit there for at least a half an hour. So your car went through the car wash machine, and it would come out, and a guy would drive it across from the exit, and one guy would hand wipe your whole car, and he would wipe underneath the wheel wells and on the door jambs and the whole car. And you had to wait for this one guy. Usually Mexican, and when he was done, he would raise the rag and wave, and you would go to your car, and then you would walk around the car looking for a spot that he missed and point out, "Oh, look, there's some drops there. Oh, sorry." And he would wipe those drops, and then you could get in your car. You'd give the individual, a tip, and you drove away. And the whole thing took like at least a half an hour versus in New York, maybe 10 minutes.
Well, even I remember going to a car wash there. Yeah, it's like they have like a waiting area, and they have
Yeah,
the window so you can watch the car be washed by like the machines.
yeah,
It was like
because
it was like an experience.
Right. Because
Yeah.
that wasn't just a car, it was your baby. It was
It's,
one of your family
it's like
getting
you take the dog to the dog groomer, you
right,
take the car to the car wash, and you get to watch them do it.
right.
It's like going to your son's baseball game.
Which leaves me with it wasn't so much California, but it was the time of technology that I opened an account in Northwood Plaza where the Vons was.
Mm-hmm.
It was a Bank of America branch, and I opened an account. I had to have a bank account. And at that time, they had this new thing where you could use your phone to do some of your banking. Put in
Mm-hmm.
your account number, put in your, a menu. I want to transfer money, and you would do all that with your own fingertip. And then I got my first statement, and I noticed these 75-cent charges. I said, "What the hell are those?" So I called up. They said, "Oh, those are the fees for you to use our teleentry system." And I said, wait. You're charging me for me to do your job? So I had to go into the branch and speak to the manager. And I explained it to the manager that, wait a minute, this is completely over the line. This is so outrageous that you have me doing what your tellers do and you're charging me. First of all, I'm saving you the money for your not having a teller. I should be getting paid. As a matter of fact, I'm demanding payment of 75 cents every time I do your job. So the manager, she was trying to be accommodating and understanding. She says, "Well, as you can understand, Mr. Heller, I don't make these rules. These are made at headquarters." I said, "I know, but you're the representative right now of Bank of America, and you're the one in front of me, and I'm telling you that if you continue to charge me 75 cents, I'm going to send a bill to you for 75 cents each time." She says, "How about we just credit those 75-cent fees?" I said, "Okay." And she does bop, bop, bop. And they're all released. And I never had another charge since then. But then, it was that scam. That's me. I'm the one
Right.
that had to go into the branch and take up time of the bank manager to make my point, let alone the other 9 out of 10 people that just paid it. It was a scam.
Because most people probably didn't even notice that they're getting charged 75 cents every time they use the phone system. And
Right. Or
even
even
if
if
they
they
did,
did,
they'd be like,
they
"Oh
called
well."
they called up and were told, "Yeah, that's the fee." "Oh, okay. That's the fee. I guess that's the fee that I have to pay." Bastards.
So the moral of that story, I think that's a great culmination of everything. It's that not only is it a scam, but in most situations, anybody can do whatever they want if they want to do it.
Right.
The bank teller just like, "Oh,
Right.
they could, everything is a, again, it always goes back to Law and Order. Everything's a choice, right? You either choose to do something or do nothing.
Right.
So that's when it comes back to everything we're talking about, why nothing seems to get done, because there is no will to do it,
How
because it's
about
incompetent.
my New York City ticket that's still pending?
Did you ever resolve that?
I sent them a certified letter. I didn't do it online. I didn't like it
Mm.
the way it was set up online. So I sent certified a letter using their form to say, "No, here's copies of the pictures you sent me. There is no sign of school zone."
All right, well, I told you to send it to them email also, because now they have the excuse to screw you if they don't receive the letter.
Well, if I get the green card back, it means they received it.
But what if you don't get the green card back because the
Well,
U.S. because the USPS is now compromised. Also,
That's the risk I'm taking.
all right. Well, like I said, everything in the end comes down to avoiding getting scammed
Right,
because everyone else is trying to steal your money and you're trying to get away from that.
right. They have this thing, the local power company, Central Hudson. There's now a law, class action lawsuit against them.
For
But
what?
they it's complicated, but basically they would do these estimated bills, like every other month. They would do an estimated bill versus a meter reading. Now the meter readings are done uh, wirelessly, so there's no meter readers anymore walking around looking at your meter. They
Right.
get it's done automatically. So because they have the ability or the allowance of back when there were meter readers, the Public Service Commission allowed the power company to do alternating months of estimated bills so that they didn't have to send out people every month. Okay, I find that acceptable. But now there's no meter readers ever. So it's just a technology, but they're still doing the estimated billings. And those estimated billings are whatever they want to estimate.
Right.
So they were just like jacking up $1,000
Right.
bills
Yeah.
because
What are you going to do about it?
exactly.
Right.
And you called up and complained and they didn't answer, or they would answer and they said, there's nothing they can do. That's within their rights. If you have a problem, contact the Public Service Commission.
Uh,
And the public,
that's their version of 1-800 go fuck yourself.
right? That's
Yeah.
the Public Service Commission who will be working for Central Hudson. Next year they'll be changing their job from regulator to utility company white collar bastards. So there's a class action suit, and the customers are saying, no, you can't just unilaterally decide how much to charge because you can. You can do an actual meter reading every month of the actual charge. So that's what's happening for that scam that's been going on. I mean, I got an $800 bill. No, I was paying $330 a month for natural gas and electric on the balanced billing plan. And the end of the year, they do the final accounting. So because of inflation and the prices went up, my monthly billing didn't go up. So the adjustment now is an extra $800. So on the network, on the neighbor to neighbor neighborhood app, everybody's freaking out that they're getting ripped off because they're getting these huge charges until somebody responds and say, hey, are you on the balanced billing? Did your balanced billing go up anytime last year? Oh, I guess not. Right. But the cost of the electric and the gas did go up, but you weren't charged for it. Now you're being reconciled. So calm down. It's not a ripoff, it's an adjustment. Anyway, that's just part of the pressures on your everyday Americans to try to deal with the scamology of everything.
Well, I was just going to say, like Days of Our Lives, the scams of our lives.
Right.
That's the vibe I got from all this. I think it's a perfect time to end because we're almost out of time on Zoom again.